Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Sri Sadguru Ramana Dhyānam அருவுருகமைந்து ஞானவருளிரு நயனமேந்தி பொருளதுவெனப் போந்தார்க்குப் புக்ககமாகி அன்பர் மருளுரு மயக்கம் நீக்கும் மகா குரு ரமணமூர்த்தி திருவடி கண்ணிலொற்றி சிந்தையில் தியானம் செய்வாம்.
Touching his holy feet on our eyes, let us meditate in the heart upon Mahaguru Ramana Murti, the formless reality who assumed a human form with jnana and grace as his two eyes, being a refuge to those who come to him desiring to know the reality. He dispels the delusion of ignorance of his devotees.
The main topic we're going to be talking about today is verse 20 of Upadēśa Undiyār, but we just listened to a verse of Sadguru Ramana Dhyānam. There he says, he describes Bhagavan's two eyes as jnana and aral. That is, jnana means pure awareness and aral means grace. I have just been editing a video I made a couple of days ago with a Spanish friend, and the question, well, it wasn't his question, it was a question put by his group, which was, if pure awareness is not aware of anything other than itself, then where is the room for grace? What role can grace play? So I was just editing that video, and here Swami is talking about exactly the same thing. Bhagavan's two eyes are jnana and aral. But both, that is, jnana and grace, are his real nature. They are also our real nature. As we will find out, if we follow the path he has taught us to turn within and to merge back in our source, we will find that what we actually are, we are the fullness of pure awareness, jnana, and we are also the fullness of grace, which is love, infinite love for ourselves as we actually are. So if just I remark on it because I was just editing a video on that subject, and this verse, Ramana Sadguru Dhyānam by Sadhuam, he uses these two words to describe these two terms, jnana and aral, that is pure awareness and grace, to describe Bhagavan's two eyes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It's very beautiful.
Encapsulates everything about Bhagavan, basically.
Yes. Anyway, to come to our main topic, which is verse 20 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Bhagavan is writing these verses in a logical order. So he's in the previous verse, well, two verses earlier, he described, that is, in verse 18, he said, well, verse 17, let's go back to verse 17. Verse 17, he says, if we investigate the form of the mind, we'll find there's no such thing as mind at all. This is the direct path for all. Then what is mind? He says in verse 18, eṇḍṛu manam, thoughts alone are the mind. However, of all the thoughts, yabinam nāṇaṇeṇ enname mūlamā, that is, of all the thoughts that constitute the mind, the root thought is the thought called I. But why? Because all other thoughts are objects perceived by us. The thought called I, that is ego, is the subject, the perceiver of all other thoughts. So no other thoughts can exist without this first thought I, because they exist only in the view of this first thought I. All other thoughts are jada, they have no awareness of their own. What is aware of them is only the first thought I, ego. Therefore, he concludes verse 18, yanam manum eno. Therefore, what the mind actually is, what the mind essentially is, well, simply that means yānam, manam, enal. What is called mind is I. What that implies is what the mind essentially is only ego, the first thought I. That is, all other thoughts are constantly changing, but the thought I is the one thought that remains unchanged. So long as that is the root rising. When we rise as ego, and all the other thoughts are constantly changing, but we, this ego, remain unchanged until we again subside back into our source. So he reduces everything back to the ego. And having reduced everything back to ego in verse 18, in verse 19, he says, when one investigates within what the place is from which one rises as I will die. This is Atma-vichara. This is awareness investigation. So this is one of the fundamental principles of his teachings. That is, the nature of ego is such that it comes into being grasping form, it stands grasping form, grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving one form, it grasps another form. So grasping form is the nature of the mind. But if we seek what this mind actually is, the ego or mind, whatever we call it, if we seek what it actually is, as he says in verse 25 of Upadēśa Undiyār, if sought, it takes flight. So the nature of ego is to rise, stand, and flourish by attending to forms, that is, to things other than itself. But if it tries to attend to itself, it will take flight, he says there. That means it will subside and dissolve back into its source. That's why he says here, when one investigates within what the place is from which one rises as I will die. The place from which, what is the place from which we rise as I? It's only from ourselves. That is, from our real nature, we rise as ego. So investigating the place from which I rises means investigating our real nature, investigating what we actually are, which is just that fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. So investigating this I is, he calls Atma-vichara. Jnana in this context means awareness. Vichara means investigation. So it's awareness investigation. We're investigating awareness. What awareness? The fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. So here he concludes that if we investigate this I, it will die. If we investigate ego, it will die. And then in continuity comes this verse 20, which is the main verse we're dealing with today. What he says in this verse is, nāṇoṇḍṟu tāṉattu, nāṇāṉeṉ ḍṛoṇḍṛadu, tāṇāha tōṇḍṟumē yundīpaṛa, tāṇādu pūṇḍṛamā mundīpaṛa. What that means is, nāṇoṇḍṟu tāṇattu means in the place, here oṇḍṟu is used as a verb, meaning to merge or become one. So nāṇoṇḍṟu tāṇattu, in the place where I merges, nāṇāṉeṇ oṇḍṛadu tāṇāha tōṇḍṟumē. That is, that the one rises spontaneously, or rises as self. It can be taken either way, but spontaneously is probably more fitting here, but both meanings are equally appropriate. Appears spontaneously as nāṇāṉ. Nāṇāṉ means I am I. In many translations of Bhagavan's verses where he uses this term nāṇāṉ or aham, it is translated in English as I-I. That is that doesn't really mean anything. In Tamil, nāṇāṉ means I am I. That is, in Tamil, if you have a sentence consisting of a subject and a subject predicate, like when the subject predicate means you're saying the subject is the subject predicate, there's no need for the verb is. That is, if the verb is understood. So, for example, nāṇ means who am I? But actually the words are nān means I, ya means who. So it's I who, but the am is understood there. Or for example, in Sanskrit, shivoham or soham. Shiva aham means Shiva is I, or soham, he is I. Is understood there. So when he says here nān, he means I am I. The reason he uses this term I am I, it is to distinguish what we actually are from ego. That is, the ego is a false identification. That is, as ego, we always identify ourselves with a body. That is, we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. And body here doesn't mean just the physical form, as Bhagavan says in verse 5 of Ulladu Udul Panchakosa Uru. The body is a form of 5 sheaves. So the nature of ego is to always identify itself with this body consisting of 5 sheaves. 5 sheaves means the physical form of the body, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. So the nature of ego is I am this. But to identify ourselves with anything other than I is a false identification, because the only thing that is always shining is I. In sleep, we exist without being aware of any body or anything. So we cannot be anything other than I alone, because in sleep we exist as I without anything else. So what we actually are, our true identity, is only I. So he uses this term I am I to express the experience of ourself as we actually are. In older texts, it is often said, but when we investigate who am I, then we will find that it's said. There's a well-known saying in Vedanta: "Deham naham koham soham." Bhagavan has written a verse on this in Ulladu Anabandham, verse 11. But deham naham means this body is not I. Koham, who am I? Soham, I am he. So the implication is that if we investigate what we actually are, we will experience ourselves as I am he. In other words, I am God, or I am Brahman, or whatever. But Bhagavan expresses it in a more refined way. No, it is not an identification of ourself as Brahman. It's an identification of ourself as ourself. I am I. I am nothing other than I. This is a more refined way of expressing it, because so long as we talk about Brahman or God, it's as if there's something other than ourselves. So we're identifying ourselves with something other than ourselves. Seemingly, that's the implication of the term. Whereas Bhagavan wants to emphasize that I is nothing other than I. Yes, Brahman is I. Aham Brahmasmi. But we don't actually, Brahman doesn't experience itself as I am Brahman. How does Brahman experience itself? Only as I am I. It doesn't identify itself with anything other than itself. So that is the meaning of, that is the deep import of this term nāṇ. Unfortunately, this is completely lost in most English translations of this verse and other verses where Bhagavan has used this term, because they translate it as I hyphen I, which doesn't really mean anything very much, but actually it's a term that has a very deep and profound meaning. We cannot be anything other than ourselves. So what is our true identity? Only I am I. So that's the significance of this term, which Bhagavan uses in many verses. I'll talk afterwards about some other verses where Bhagavan uses this term. So what is it that appears as I am I? He says, oṉḍṛu. Adu means that. Oṇḍṟu means one. One as it's one. it's a noun that means one. So it means the one or the one thing, or one thing. So I, the one or one thing, appears spontaneously as I am I. Regarding the first clause of this sentence, in the place where I emerges, we need to contrast that with the previous verse. In the previous verse, he said, when we investigate I will die. I here stands for ego in this context. So when we investigate this ego, it will die. Does that mean ego will cease to exist? In one sense, yes. In another sense, no. Though we talk about the death of ego, what ego ceases to be ego, but it doesn't cease entirely, because what is the substance of ego? What is it that appears as ego? It is only the pure awareness. That's why here rather than talking, he expresses in a different way to suggest that it's not a cessation of I, but a merging of I back into its source. By using this verb, nāṉoṇḍṟu tāṉattu, the place where I emerges is the same place from which I rose. What is the place from which I rose? Our own real nature, that is that pure awareness, that fundamental awareness of our own existence, I am. So it's not, the ego ceases to exist as ego, but it remains as pure awareness. So it can be said it merges in its source. This is like saying, if you mistake a rope to be a snake, if you look at the snake very carefully, the snake will disappear and the rope alone will remain. Does that mean the snake has ceased to exist? It is no longer, that is, the snake never actually existed. It seemed to exist. But when we look at it very carefully and see that it is just a rope, what has happened to the snake? That appearance of the snake has merged back into its source. So in one sense, we can say, yes, by looking at the snake very carefully, you've killed the snake, because that illusion that it was a snake, that illusion is removed. But what has happened to that snake? It is merged back into the base, into the source from which it rose, which is the rope. Likewise, when we look very carefully at ego merges back into its source. That is, we see what we are now mistaking to be ego. When we look at it carefully enough, we see, oh, it's just pure awareness. It is just it's my real nature. That is, ego seems to be ego only so long as we're looking at other things, only so long as we're grasping form, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Upadēśa. So when we grasp forms, we seem to be ego. But when ego looks back at itself to see what it actually is, it merges back into the source and remains as it actually is, which is as pure awareness. So ego as ego has died, but ego as it actually is what remains. That is as pure awareness. That pure awareness is what Bhagavan describes as I am I. That is that clear awareness of ourself as we actually are. Ourself, being aware of ourself as ourself alone, in other words. And then he says in the last sentence of this verse, āṇadu tān pūṇḍṛamā. That is pūṇḍṛam. Pūṇḍṛam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit noun pūṇa. Pūṇa means the whole, the fullness. So it implies the infinite whole. So that itself is the infinite whole. That is that which appears as I. That is the infinite whole. So is the infinite whole something that appears and disappears? No. Bhagavan has clarified about that in verse 30 of Upadēśa, which is very close to this verse. It's a parallel verse, we can say. What he says in verse 30 of Upadēśa, nāṇāṉeṇ manam ulnādi ulum nanabe, nanam avan tale nanamura, nanan tōṇḍṟum, oṇḍṟu tāṉāha. That what in a way that first sentence is a combination. It's the same idea expressed in verses 19 and 20 of Upadēśa Undiyār. That is what he means in this sentence is, as soon as the mind reaches the heart, inwardly investigating who am I? That is nāṇāṉeṉ manum ulnādi. Nādi here means investigating. Ulnādi means investigating within or inwardly investigating. Nāṇā, who am I? So when the mind inwardly investigates who am I, and thereby ulum nanabe, when it reaches the heart, what happens? He who is I, nanam avan tale nanamura. He who is I will die. That means the ego will die. And when that ego dies, nāṇāṉeṉ tōṇḍṛum oṇḍṟu tāṉāha. One thing appears spontaneously as I am I. So here he said, as he says in verse 20 of Upadēśa Undiyār, here he says it appears spontaneously. Or that spontaneously can also be taken to mean the word tāṇāha can either mean spontaneously or as oneself. It amounts to this. I mean, both meanings are appropriate. But this seems to imply that it's something that appears. But as Bhagavan often said, whatever appears will disappear. So does it mean it's just an unreal thing like ego which appears and disappears? No, he clarifies in the next sentence, tōṇḍṛinam nāṇoṇḍṟu. Though it appears, it is not I. What does he mean when he says it is not I? He means it is not ego. He doesn't literally mean it is not I. It is what we actually are, but it is not ego. So when he says nāṇoṇḍṟu, here it means it is not ego. So it is the nature of ego to appear and disappear, but it is not the nature of the reality, the infinite whole to appear and disappear, as he says in verse 7 of Upadēśa Undiyār. What he says in verse 7 of Upadēśa is, though the world and awareness rise and subside simultaneously. What he means here by awareness, arivu, in this context, is that which is aware of the world. In other words, the ego. So though the world and ego rise and subside simultaneously, the world shines by awareness. That means the world shines by that which is aware of it. In other words, ego. And then he says in the next sentence, only that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the place or the base for the or space for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness, I mean, world and ego, is the substance. Substance here, he uses the term pūṛṇḍṛam, which is the whole. Again, he uses the word pūṇḍṛam here. So the real substance, the infinite whole, is not something that appears and disappears. It shines as a base for the appearing and disappearing of both the world and the perceiver of the world, namely ego. So that's why he says here, though this I appears, it is not I, meaning it is not ego. Then how are we to understand this? It doesn't actually appear. But when we turn within to see what we actually are, when we see what we actually are, it is a fresh clarity of self-awareness. That is, we are always aware of ourselves as I am, but suddenly we see ourselves with a fresh clarity. We see, rather than whereas previously we were, till now we've been taking ourselves to be, I am this person, I am this limited finite entity, this body. We suddenly see ourselves as I alone. So when we see ourselves as I alone, that's a fresh clarity. So that in that sense it appears. That is like saying, when the sun is always shining in the sky, but when the cloud, so long as it's covered with clouds, we don't see the sun clearly. But when the wind blows the clouds away, the sun suddenly appears. Does it actually appear? From our perspective on Earth, because the clouds were between us and the sun, when the clouds are removed, it seems that the sun appeared, but actually the sun was always shining there. So it's only from the perspective of ego that it seems to be an appearance. But as soon as that I appears, ego is thereby destroyed. So this is what Bhagavan sometimes describes as the sphuraṇa. And he said that when the sphuraṇa subsides, that is the sahaja state. Sphuraṇa means that fresh clarity of self-awareness. So, but when he talks about the subsidence of sphuraṇa, he doesn't mean that the clarity of self-awareness subsides, but the freshness, the newness of it subsides. And when we recognize, oh, I was always nothing other than I. So it's a very subtle thing Bhagavan is indicating here. Obviously, these are things that cannot be adequately expressed in words. So he uses words that seemingly contradict. That is, the reality is not something that appears, but here he says it appears. And then he says, though it appears, it is not I, meaning it's not ego, which is the I that appears and disappears. So if it's not I, in the sense of ego, what is it? He says, porul pūṇḍṛamadu, tāṇāṃ. The term porul is a Tamil term. It's equivalent to the Sanskrit term vastu. It means the substance. Like if you have gold ornaments, the vastu is the gold. The necklace and the ring, these are the forms in which that substance is appearing. So porul means the substance. So what he says is, it is the porul pūṇḍṛam. That means it is the whole substance. It is the substance which is the whole. In other words, it's the pūṇa vastu, the entire reality. And he also says, tāṇāṃ. It is the substance that is oneself. That is what we actually are, is only that substance. So when he says it's not I, he's not saying it's not what we actually are. He's saying it is not this full side that appears and disappears. It's not ego, in other words. It is the real I, but is always shining. So these are very subtle ideas that Bhagavan expresses in Upadēśa and Upadēśa Undiyār. So we need to read these verses very carefully and think about them very deeply. Then only we'll get the point that Bhagavan is what Bhagavan is pointing at here. So it's if we try and, for instance, if we take, when he says it's not I, if we take it too literally, then is it something other than I? No. Here, in that context, when he says nāṇoṇḍṟu, what he's referring to as I is ego. But it is what we actually are, because it is that which shines as I am I. So this is very, very subtle. Bhagavan uses very simple words, but to convey a very deep and subtle meaning. Another verse in which Bhagavan expresses very much the same idea is verse 2 of Atma-Vidya. What he says in that verse is, āṇadu iduve nāṇāṃ. What that means is, āṇadu, this body which consists of flesh. In other words, this fleshy body, iduve nāṇāṃ. This alone is what I am. This alone is I. So that, and then he goes on, ennum nineve, nāṇāṉevugal, se o na. So what he's saying in this first clause is, since the thought, this body composed of flesh itself is I, alone is the one thread on which all the various thoughts are strung. una udal iduve nāṇāṃ ennum nineve nāna ninevugul se or na ennum adnal. Since it is so, nāna idum edu, that we can take in two ways. We can split it either as nāna, who am I, idum edu, what is its place or what is its source, or we can take it as we can take there to mean the place where the place where it pervades or it spreads. So since the thought, this body composed of flesh itself is I, alone is the one thread on which all the various thoughts are strung. If one goes within investigating what is the place from which I spreads, or who am I, what is the place from which I rose, we can take it either way. Nana idum edu eṇṭṛu ul ponal. If we go within, what happens? Nirevugal poi, the thoughts cease. Nāṇāṉeṇ guheul tāṇāiṭirum anvayam. Atma-vichara, that means pure self-awareness, alone will shine in the will shine spontaneously as I am I, in the cave is all he says. Cave here alludes to the heart, which is sometimes referred to as the cave of the heart. So within the cave of our own heart, in other words, deep within us, what will shine forth is pure self-awareness, Atma-vichara, will shine forth as I am I, nāṇāṉeṇ. And then he goes on to say, this is, he goes on to say, iduve moname, this is silence. Ekavaname, the one space. Here, the one space means the one space of pure awareness. Imbataname, the abode of bliss. So what he's saying here is that what shines as I is the one silent and blissful space of pure self-awareness. So in all these verses, Bhagavan is emphasizing, if we go within investigating what we actually are, this ego will die. That is this thought, this body, I am this body consisting of flesh. If we investigate who actually am I, what is the place where this I arises, all thoughts will come to an end. Why? Because their root, this first thought, I am this body, in other words, ego, will come to an end. The analogy he uses here, he says this one thought, this thought I am this body is the one thread on which all the various thoughts are strung. The analogy is a string of beads. If you have a necklace with many colorful beads all on a string, if you cut the string, the beads will scatter and you have no necklace left. Like that, all other thoughts depend for their seeming existence upon the first thought I. Only when we're aware of ourselves as I in this body are we consequently aware of all other thoughts. So it's only when we rise as ego that other thoughts come into existence. So all other thoughts depend for their seeming existence upon the seeming existence of ourself as ego. And as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. So again, this is very, very deep and subtle ideas. Bhagavan packs into very, very simple, using very simple words, and into very simple verses, he packs so much very, very deep meaning. But one thing we understand from all these verses is what is the Bhagavan's teachings are all about one thing, about practice, about putting it into practice. That is, how can we bring, what he's describing here is what happens when I will die. But how will this I die, this ego, how will this ego be eradicated? It is only by turning within and investigating what we actually are, or what is the place, the source from which we have risen. So Bhagavan whatever Bhagavan has taught us, it's all that Bhagavan has taught us a lot of, though in a very simple way, Bhagavan has taught us a lot of very deep philosophy. But the purpose of the philosophy has one aim and one aim alone: practice, putting it into practice, because only by actually following the path that Bhagavan has shown us will we experience what he's talking about. The purpose, what is the purpose of Guru? Why Bhagavan has appeared in our life? To teach us that the happiness we're all seeking, it doesn't lie outside us where we've been seeking it till now. It lies only within. So it's only by turning within that we will experience the infinite happiness that we actually are. So we cannot understand Bhagavan's teachings unless we understand that whatever he is teaching us about whatever subject, it's all directed back. It's all, he's teaching us that. For example, he teaches us that the world is unreal. The world is just a mental projection. Why does he teach us that? In order to help us to turn our mind within. Because if this world is just a dream, if it's just a creation of our own mind, why should we be so concerned about it? Well, so it's to wean our mind off its concern about its interest in this world. But he teaches it. So all Bhagavan's teachings have this one aim and one aim alone: to help us to turn our mind within. Because it's only by turning our mind within that we can eradicate this ego and thereby experience ourselves as we actually are, as the infinite happiness that we actually are, and thereby be free of all other problems which arise only for ego. In sleep, when ego doesn't rise, we have no problems. Only in waking and dream we face so many problems. Why? Because we've risen as ego. So Bhagavan's teachings are so simple, but so deep, so very, very deep, and so practical. But the one thing perhaps I haven't explained clearly enough is this idea of pūṇḍṛam. As I said, pūṇḍṛam means, is a Tamil version of the word pūṇa. Pūṇa means what is full. It also means what is whole. So the whole is, the whole in the sense that that which is infinite is the whole. Beyond the infinite, there cannot be anything. So it is the whole in the sense that it is all that actually exists. So what actually exists is only that pūṇa vastu, but appears as I. But appears as, appears as I am I, but appears as the clarity of self-awareness, but I am nothing other than I. So that is, in other words, we are nothing other than that. But the experience is not I am that, but I am I. Because what is I? It is only that pūṇa. So the pūṇa isn't aware of itself as I am pūṇa. It's aware of itself as only I am I.
Thank you, Michael.
Right.
So I have a quick question, and as we wait for questions on the chat box. You mentioned sphuraṇa.
Yes.
And you said when the sphuraṇa subsides, that would be described as a sahaja state.
Yes.
There seems to be some confusion there. So basically that implies that as long as we use the word sphuraṇa or freshness, the ego is still there.
Yes.
Isn't that right? So can you explain that a little bit deeper?
Well, when we talk about the sphuraṇa, it sounds like it's one thing. Sphuraṇa is not an object of experience, it's a quality of experience. It's a clarity of self-experience. So in different, Bhagavan used this term sphuraṇa simply to refer to clarity of self-awareness. So even during practice, even while we're practicing, the more we turn within, the greater is the degree of clarity of self-awareness. So we experience sphuraṇa in a certain sense, even while practicing, but there are different degrees of sphuraṇa. That is, as soon as we begin to practice this self-investigation, turning our attention within, we begin to get a clearer awareness of ourself as something distinct from this body and mind and everything. So that clarity that we gain by this, it may not be the full clarity, but even this partial clarity is sphuraṇa in a certain sense. Bhagavan also used the term sphuraṇa referring to a final experience. But for example, in the Sanskrit version of this verse, let's see if I can remember it. Anyway, what he in Tamil he uses the word tōṇḍṟumē. It appears in Sanskrit he uses the word spurti, which is the verb from which the word sphuraṇa originates. So spurti. Spurti hritsvayam, he says. It shines. It shines in the heart spontaneously, or it shines as the heart spontaneously. So shine there means it shines forth. It takes on a fresh clarity. But for those who know Tamil, in Tamil there's a verb, but it's very commonly used. If you want to say. If you want to ask someone, have you understood this? You say, puriyama. Puriyam. Yes, I've understood. But what does puriyam mean? It's clear to me. That's what it is. The literal meaning of puri is because this Tamil verb puri it's a Tamil form of the Sanskrit verb spur, which means to be clear. So when we say puriyam, I understand it. Adu enikku puriyam. That is clear to me. That the equivalent of what we'd say in English. I understand it, but we can also say in English, yes, it's clear to me. I understand it clearly. So that word puri, that is used in Tamil in the sense of something being clear, something being understood, is the same thing. So it's a very simple word in Sanskrit and also in Tamil. In Sanskrit, it has many different, it's used in many different contexts. So it can be interpreted, according to the context, it can be interpreted in different ways. That is, anything that makes itself clearly known can be described as spur. That is the action of making itself, or the verb that describes making itself clearly known is spur. So, for example, the beating of the heart, the physical heart, or the pulse, that can be described as spur. It's making itself known. It's palpitating. So, in some contexts, sphuraṇa can mean palpitating. But people have taken this term out of context. They say, or the vibration of the trembling of eye, or the glittering of eye. Only objects can vibrate or tremble or palpitate or whatever. So since eye is not an object, it's inappropriate to refer to sphuraṇa in the context in which Bhagavan uses it as the trembling or the palpitation or the vibration of eye. There's no such thing. Only objects can vibrate or palpitate. So, but in the context of Bhagavan's teachings, sphuraṇa simply, sometimes Bhagavan referred to it as aham sphuraṇa. So it's the clarity of I. So whenever we experience any degree of fresh clarity of self-awareness, that is a form of sphuraṇa in the sense in which Bhagavan's using it. In in Vichara Sangraham, Bhagavan has used this term sphuraṇa. Actually, in Tamil, he uses the word spuripu, which is a Tamil equivalent of the word sphuraṇa. But in English books, it's usually translated as sphuraṇa for the benefit of those who know Sanskrit. There, Bhagavan says that when you experience that sphuraṇa, in other words, when you experience that fresh clarity, you should hold on to it. If you hold on to it, it will burn away ego and its vasanas. Bhagavan uses the analogy of camphor. If you light camphor, the flame will catch the camphor. The camphor will continue burning until there's no residue left. Often camphor is not so pure, so there's sometimes a little bit of residue, but if it's pure camphor, it will burn without leaving any residue at all. Likewise, if we hold on to this sphuraṇa, this clarity of self-awareness, in other words, we keep our mind facing towards ourselves, inward facing, or ahamukham, as Bhagavan said, I-facing, that clarity of self-awareness, which we thereby experience, in other words, that sphuraṇa, will burn this ego and all its vasanas. And when the ego is completely destroyed, then the sphuraṇa will subside. Just like when the camphor is completely burned, there's nothing left of a flame to burn, so the flame subsides. So Bhagavan has used that and talks about the subsidence of sphuraṇa. That is, only when ego is completely eradicated will the sphuraṇa subside. Well, but what subsides is not the clarity of self-awareness, the freshness of the clarity of self-awareness. Because so long as ego is there, it seems something new and fresh. And if we allow our attention to go back out again, it's like the clouds again come and cover the sun. Or another analogy which is used is if you've got on a pond, the pondweed. If you move away the pondweed, you can see clearly the fish inside the pond. But if you leave the pondweed, it'll again cover over. We can experience this sphuraṇa only when we are facing inwards. That is, we experience that clarity of self-awareness to the extent we are facing inwards. So in the course of our life, we are not constantly because we don't have sufficient love yet, we're not able to keep our attention constantly facing within. So again, our attention comes outwards. So again, we lose that clarity, maybe not lose it entirely, but that clarity decreases. And when we again turn within, it again shines more brightly. So that's like if you put a cup over the burning camphor, the flame will begin to go down. Why? Because it's deprived of oxygen. So if you don't want the flame to go out, you quickly have to remove the cup from over it so that it gets air again, then it can continue burning. Likewise, if we want to keep this clarity of self-awareness burning, we need to keep turning our attention within. Otherwise, if we allow our attention to go outwards too much, then that clarity gets lost because it's deprived of its oxygen. That is the oxygen of self-attentiveness. So during practice, we experience sphuraṇa, we experience the clarity to the extent that we're turning within. And to the extent that we're experiencing that sphuraṇa, that clarity of self-awareness, that sphuraṇa, that will be burning away ego and its vasanas. Eventually, if we persevere in our practice, eventually it will completely eradicate ego, and then the sphuraṇa will subside. That freshness will subside. And why? Because when it's only for ego, there's a greater or lesser degrees of clarity of self-awareness. For our real nature, its clarity of self-awareness is always pūṇa, always full, always whole. Pūṇḍṛam, as Bhagavan says in these verses. So when it's experienced as pūṇḍṛam, there's no scope for it to appear or disappear or to subside. So it's then experienced as sahaja, because that is when ego is eradicated and we remain as the pure awareness that we actually are. For pure awareness, the clarity of self-awareness is nothing new because that's its very nature. So yes, in some context, Bhagavan did talk about the sphuraṇa merging, but we shouldn't confuse things too much, because sometimes, as I say, he's talking about, he uses the term sphuraṇa, or a verb form of it as spur, in the context of the clarity, the relative degree of increase, relatively increased degree of clarity that we experience during practice. But what he's talking about in this verse is the full clarity, that pūṇa telivu. That is, telivu means that clarity, that the sphuraṇa. So there, he's talking about the fullness of. So that is after the subsidence of freshness. So we need to see beyond the words to what they're pointing at. Bhagavan says in this verse, he begins with the verse nāṉoṇḍṛu tāṇattu. Nāṉoṇḍṛu tāṇattu means in the place where I merges, in the place where I there means ego. So in the place where ego merges, there this full clarity shines forth. And so it's momentarily experienced as something fresh. But as soon as it's experienced, then it becomes sahaja. There's no gap between the subsidence of ego and the experience of it as sahaja. So what Bhagavan is talking about here is the very moment where ego merges, the clarity is there, and that is the clarity seemingly appears, and then, oh no, this isn't anything new. This is what I always am. I am I. So these are very subtle things. We shouldn't try and we should be very cautious about that is, we should think very carefully about this and try and understand what Bhagavan is saying here, and not confusing what he says in one context with what he says in another context. In other contexts, he talks about sphuraṇa relative to practice. Here he's talking about the final moment of attainment.
Thank you, Michael. Anand, you want to go ahead and ask your question, please? Anand?
Oh, hello. Yeah, it's so clear, especially the Purti or in Puridal in Tamil. It's an amazing explanation. Anyway, my question that you asked in the chat is, can sphuraṇa indicate the state called chit-jada-granthi? That is, going beyond that granthi will lead to purana, or the self. Is that correct statement?
That is, chit-jada-granthi is a description of ego. It is the nature of ego. That is, ego is neither, that is, Bhagavan explains it very nicely in verse 24 of Uludunapadu. Jada udul nāṇoṇḍṛu. But this insentient body doesn't say I. When he says say there, he doesn't literally mean what he's using the word say in a metaphorical sense. This body is not aware of itself as I, is the implication. Sat-chit-undiyār. Sat-chit doesn't rise. But ideal, between these two, in between these two, again, he's using in between in a metaphorical sense, because obviously there's no gap between Sat-chit is the substance, the body is a form. There's no, just like there's no gap between the gold and the necklace. So when he talks about in between, he's using it in a metaphorical sense. So udal alava nāṇoṇḍṛu udikum ideal. So in between, one thing called I rises as the extent of the body. So what is this one thing? It is neither the body, because it's aware of itself as I, and it's not sat-chit because it rises, but it borrows the properties of both, or rather it misappropriates the properties of both. Firstly, it misappropriates its existence and its awareness. It has misappropriated from where? From sat-chit. Because only sat-chit is actually exists and is actually aware. So it misappropriates the existence and awareness of sat-chit, so it's aware of itself as I am. But it also misappropriates the form of the body. So it's aware of itself as I am this body. So the I am is the sat-chit portion. The body is the jada portion. So because it is neither this nor that, that's why he says in between. For example, supposing you tell me some story that you've read in a newspaper and ask me whether it's true. I can say it's neither true nor false. It's somewhere in between. What does that mean? It is not wholly true. It is not wholly false, but it has got elements of truth and elements of fiction. So it's a mixture of truth and falsehood. Likewise, this ego, it's not entirely unreal, and it's not entirely real. It's somewhere in between. It borrows its reality. It borrows from Sat-Chit. Its unreality, it borrows from the body, and it mixes these two together. So in chit-jada-granthi, chit is referring to Sat-Chit. Jada is referring to the body. Granthi is a knot. So when these two things become entangled, that the knot formed by that entanglement of chit and jada is ego. So it's the false awareness. I am this body. I am is the chit portion. Body is the jada portion, and that awareness. I am this body. That is the granthi. That is the knot. So long as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, our clarity of self-awareness is clouded. If we begin to practice this path, the path that Bhagavan has taught us, trying to turn our attention within to face I am alone, thereby leaving aside the body and all other jada phenomena. All phenomena are jada. Body here means all the five sheaths are jada, as he says in verse 22 of Upadēśa Undiyār, which we'll be talking about in a couple of months. There he says all these five sheaths are jada and asat, so they're not I. So when we as ego turn our attention within to try to investigate who am I, it's the I portion, the I am portion of ego, the chit portion of the chit-jada-granthi, that we are trying to hold on to. To the extent to which we hold on to that chit portion, we experience a fresh clarity of self-awareness. That is the sphuraṇa. So it is the sphuraṇa which brings about the dissolution of the chit-jada-granthi. That is, it is the clarity of self-awareness that will sever this false identification of ourself with the body. Does that adequately answer your question?
Yeah, really, thanks.
Thank you, Michael. I think it may be a repeat. So there's another question here.
There's no harm in repeating. We need,
exactly.
We need to dim this in again.
Right.
Bhagavan's teachings are so simple. How come we spend so much time talking about them, studying them, trying to put them into practice? Because we need to din it in.
Right.
Otherwise, we can express Bhagavan's teachings in a few words, but who will grasp it? Bhagavan has expressed his teachings extremely simply, but because of our limited grasping power, we need to dwell on it more and more. And most important, we need to put it into practice, because it's only by putting it into practice that we get the required clarity, because the clarity doesn't come from outside. It can come only from within.
Thank you. Yeah. The question is sphuraṇa like the funeral stick, that final stick that burns in the end?
Yeah, we could say that. We could say that. That's one way of saying it. Bhagavan, yes, in what Bhagavan says in the 6th paragraph of nāṇā, which that is referring to, what he says there, he says, nāṇāṉeṉ vicharane inale manamadangam. The mind will subside, or will cease, will come to an end only by means of the investigation, who am I? And he puts a very, very strong stress on that. Vicharane inal means by vichara. Vicharane inal a means is emphasizing it, but he puts a double emphasis. Vicharane inal ye. So he's putting the double emphasis there. So it's only by this vichara that the mind will cease, will come to an end. And then he says, nāṇāṉeṉ ninevu, matra ninevu gale ellam aritu, pinnum sudu tadipol, mudivil tāṇum ariyum. So yeah, what he's here he describes this vichara as the thought, who am I? His thought, it's not literally a thought, that is when our attention is going out towards other things, that we call thought. But now we're turning our attention within. So it's a cessation of thought, but metaphorically he describes it as a thought. So that thought, who am I, or that keenness of self-investigation, that is the turning of our attention within, that will destroy all other thoughts. And then it will, like the stick used for stirring the funeral pyre, it will come to an end. We can explain this in various ways. That is, in order to investigate who am I, what is the tool that we use for investigation? It is attention. It's by turning our attention back towards ourselves. When ego is finally destroyed, there's no one left to attend to anything. That is, pure awareness doesn't need to attend to itself because it's never aware of anything other than itself. It's only as ego, but we need to attend to ourselves, because attention is a selective use of our awareness. We're focusing our awareness on one thing rather than another thing. So it's only when we're aware of many things that the question of attention can arise. So when we rise as ego, we're aware of so many things, and our attention goes out to this thing, that thing, and we're constantly allowing our attention to flow outwards. Now, when we follow Bhagavan's path, we're trying to turn our attention back within. So that attention, that inward turning of our attention, that is the stick that is used for stirring the funeral pyre. When the corpse is finally, when the funeral pyre is finally, when the corpse is finally burned, the corpse of this ego is finally burned, the stick itself will also be destroyed. That is, because the more you stir the funeral pyre, the more the stick is getting burned. That stick is the self-attentiveness.
Self-attention.
So it's very closely related to the sphuraṇa, because to the extent that we are self-attentive, to that extent do we experience a clarity of self-awareness. So these things are all very, very, very closely related. The problem arises when we take sphuraṇa to be a thing. Sphuraṇa, as I say, is just a clarity of self-awareness. How do we get that clarity of self-awareness? By means of this investigation, who am I? That means by means of turning our attention back within to see what we actually are. The more we turn our attention within, the greater the degree of clarity. So these are all, Bhagavan uses many analogies, but they're all pointing towards the same thing. So we can see certain parallels between, yes, there is a certain parallel between this analogy that he uses here and that analogy of camphor. They're very closely related.
Right.
But we don't always have to equate everything, because each analogy is illustrating a certain flavor,
aspect.
a certain, I'd say more of a flavor of it. It's all this essentially the same thing, but it's every analogy, every way Bhagavan has explained this to us is one more aid to help us to understand clearly. So we need to understand each analogy in its own context, and also in the context of the whole of his teaching. So yes, naturally, there is an overlap between all these different analogies. They are related.
Right.
But we don't always have to make exact equations, because sometimes you make exact equations, you're trying to make it too rigid. Whereas these are pointers. None of these things can be definitively expressed in words. Bhagavan uses analogies, he uses words metaphorically. They're all pointing, it's what they're pointing at, that is the important thing. In the analogy of burning camphor, the camphor is ego and all its vasanas. The flame catches the camphor and reduces, burns the camphor without leaving any residue. That is the flame. So if we want to equate or draw a parallel between this analogy and the analogy of the stick used to stir the funeral pyre, but Bhagavan used in nāṇāha in the 6th paragraph, what we need to how we need to relate it is the sphuraṇa is not the stick used to stir the funeral pyre. Sphuraṇa is the fire itself. The corpse is the is ego and all its vasanas. So the aim is to destroy to burn the corpse completely. In order to make sure that the corpse is efficiently and speedily burnt, a stick is used to stir the funeral pyre, to keep the fire burning. If you neglect it, the fire will go out before the corpse is completely destroyed. So the stick is necessary to ensure that the fire is burning sufficiently. That is, the firewood and other things that fall aside need to be pushed back, and the whole thing needs to burn till the corpse is burnt completely. Once the corpse is burnt completely, the firewood and cow dung and everything will be burnt along with it. Then the fire will be extinguished, and the stick that was used to stir it, that will also be burnt along with it. So in this analogy, the stick, as Bhagavan says, is self-attentiveness. That is what he describes as the investigation, who am I, or the thought, who am I? So that is the stick. The stick is used to keep the flame alive. The flame, the fire is sphuraṇa. So if we want, when we turn our attention back towards ourselves, we are igniting that fire. We are cultivating that increased clarity of self-attentiveness, which is what is called sphuraṇa. By persevering in our practice of self-attentiveness and going deeper and deeper within, that is stirring the funeral pyre and ensuring that the flame of sphuraṇa is kept burning, and not only kept burning ever more brightly till it has completely destroyed ego and all its vasanas. So if, as I say, if we want to draw a parallel, we shouldn't equate sphuraṇa with the stick, because the stick has an active role. That active role, not that self-attentiveness is an action, but in effect it is playing an active role of keeping that fire, of that flame of sphuraṇa burning brightly in order to thereby destroy ego and its vasanas. So the corpse on the funeral pyre is ego and its vasanas. The stick used to stir it is the investigation, who am I? In other words, the practice of self-attentiveness, and the fire itself is sphuraṇa. So it may be useful to see the parallels, but we shouldn't allow ourselves to try to have fixed ideas about these things, because there's always, that is the beauty of Bhagavan's teachings, is there's always more to be discovered. Though his teachings are very, very simple, if we are studying his teachings and putting them into practice, we are constantly getting fresh clarity from them. That is, for example, Upadēśa. I've been studying Upadēśa for more than 40 years, but I still am learning from it. Not that I'm learning any more information. It is, but the meaning of the text becomes more and more clear. The deep, deep meaning of Bhagavan's word. And that applies to any work of Bhagavan. Naranacha Panchakam, Upadēśa Undiyār, nāṇoṇḍṟu, any of Bhagavan's works. If we put them into practice and study them deeply, I was saying to someone a few days ago, Bhagavan's works are like Kamadhenu. Kamadhenu is the cow that will provide everything, like the the wish-fulfilling tree. It will always be giving. So the more we go deep into Bhagavan's teachings, the more he is giving, the more clarity he will give us through his words.
Thank you, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any questions on the chat box.
I do have a question.
Go ahead, Ram.
Related to that. So regardless of how many years went on with this sadhana, I seem to be sometimes at the same place where I was, because I keep going back to the old vasanas. I guess if you can allude to why we shouldn't be gauging our own progress or something like that, I would appreciate it, because mine seems to compare all the time where I was versus now. There are some specific progress elements that have been made, but in terms of Atma-vichara, I feel I'm at the same place where I was before in 95. So would like a little bit clarity on that one.
Right. When we were children, we were growing up year by year, but it's very difficult for a child to see its own growth. It sees the changes in the world around it. Things that used to be very big things have now become rather small. So our outlook on life will be changing. That is, the world will still appear as it is. The same names, the same forms, the same problems, all these things will be there. Our attitude towards these things will be changing. But it's not something that we can measure. At least when a child is growing up, you can measure its height. Yes, last year it was 4 foot, and now this year it's 4'3". So it's grown. He or she has grown 3 inches in the last year. We can measure because it's an objective thing. But this is not objective. This is subjective. So any yardstick we try to use to measure our progress is something other than ourselves. So it cannot really tell us the progress we've made. The change that is required is a change deep in our heart. That is, it's our Vishaya vasanas of a problem. We are aware of Vishaya vasanas only when they rise to the surface of our mind. But if we are following this path, definitely our Vishaya vasanas are being weakened. We may not be aware of them being weakened. It may seem that they're still persisting. But so long as we are persisting in our practice, they are getting weaker and weaker. But when our Vishaya vasanas get weaker, we are able to turn within more deeply. When we turn within more deeply, the resistance from the Vishaya vasanas becomes stronger, because that is the ego is fighting for its own survival. On the one hand, we as ego, we want to surrender ourselves. But at the same time, we are unwilling to let go of everything else. So there's a battle going on in our heart, in our will. So this battle that's going on in our will, the more the mind is purified, and the more inclination we have to turn within, the greater the surviving vasanas will fight back. We can give an analogy. If you're hunting a tiger, if the tiger is wounded and cornered somewhere, it is very weak. But because it's very weak, it will fight back very ferociously. So likewise, the ego and its vasanas, the weaker they become, the more ferociously they'll fight, because they're desperate for their own survival. So it's not really something we can. Another analogy that Sadhu gave, he said, if you see a crescent moon, you can't see any craters there. But if you see a half moon, you can begin to vaguely see the craters on the moon. Only when the moon is full moon, very bright, you then see the craters very clearly. Likewise, the more the mind is purified, the more clearly we're aware of the imperfections of the vasanas. So a worldly person, a person whose mind is always outward going, they don't feel, if you talk to them about Vishaya vasanas, they'll say, what are you talking about? I don't have any Vishaya vasanas. They'll think it'll all be mumbo jumbo to them, because it's only when we're turning within, but then we recognize how strong are our Vishaya vasanas, how strong is our inclination to go outward. So the more we turn within, the more clearly we recognize the strength of our inclination to go outwards. So the more the mind is purified, the more clearly we recognize the impurities that are still lingering in the mind. So, and also the other thing is, gauging our progress is really, it's again a form of an Atma-vichara, because what we actually are doesn't progress anywhere. It is always as it is. It's only for ego that there's progress. But so long as ego is taking interest in its progress, it's not investigating what it actually is. Am I progressing or not? Bhagavan didn't ask us to investigate, am I progressing or not? He asked us to investigate, what am I? Who am I? That is, it's our being we're investigating, not the progress or whatever. The progress will be, if we're investigating our being, surely we are progressing. But we don't have to try and gauge it, or we don't even have to be concerned about it. So long as we are following Bhagavan's path, so long as we're trying to turn our attention within, we are traveling in the right direction. Whether our destination is 10 miles away or 100 miles away or 10 light years away, doesn't matter. We're going in the right direction. That's all we should be concerned about. We should be in the here and now. Am I going to get realization tomorrow? Am I going to get realization next year? Am I going to get realization in this lifetime? Or do I have to wait for another lifetime? Or how many more lifetimes? That's all allowing our attention to go away from ourselves. What Bhagavan asks us to investigate is, what am I here and now? If we find out what we are here and now, that is what we always are. So it's only in the present moment that we can investigate ourselves. So let us not worry about the past or the future. Past and future are just thoughts about things other than ourselves. Let us be in the present, be with the being, be with that which is ever present. That is I. Does that answer your question adequately?
Yes,
or
it
is
does.
that still unsatisfactory?
It does pretty well. Thank you.
Yeah. So in Gita, Krishna says, you have the right to the action, not to the fruit thereof. The same we can apply here. Bhagavan has given us a very simple task. Be self-attentive. We have the right to be self-attentive. The results of that, that's in Bhagavan's hands. That's nothing to do with us. Leave all that to him. Bhagavan has asked us to attend to ourselves. Let's do as Bhagavan said and leave everything else to him.
Bhagavan said, Nichayam Urupaduvan.
Yes,
So,
yes,
I mean, if you have faith in Bhagavan, we just have to
Yes.
trust it and let go of all this gauging
Yes.
our progress and all those stuff.
That is in what's it, 10th or 11th, the 10th paragraph of at the end of the 10th paragraph of nāṇa. He says,
If you could translate that, please.
Yes. Oruvan evlo papiai irandalam. Though one is, however sinful, whatever worse sinner one may be, nam papiai irakarain. Epidi kade tepa po karain. I am a sinner. How am I going to be saved? Instead of lamenting and weeping like that, if one tan papi ennate arave oritu, completely giving up the thought that one is a sinner, if one is steadfast in clinging to Svarupa Dhyāna, that is self-attentiveness, one avan nityamai urupaduvan, that he will certainly be saved. That urupaduvan literally means he will certainly be formed, or he will certainly be reformed or transformed. But it's an idiomatic way of saying he will certainly be saved. So it doesn't matter of however great a sinner we may be, however many worst type of Vishaya vasanas we may have, let us not be concerned about that. That's all Bhagavan's problem. Bhagavan has asked us to cling to Svarupa. In the previous sentence, he said, Atane vasane galam adungi, Svarupa matramai irika mudiyama. Is it possible to bring about the subsidence of all these vasanas and to remain only as my real nature, instead of without giving room even to that doubting thought? Svarupa dhyanate vida pidiyai pidikavendam. It's necessary to cling tenaciously to Svarupa dhyana. Svarupa dhyana literally means meditation on one's real nature. In other words, self-attentiveness. And he says it in an extremely forceful way in Tamil. Vida pidiyai pidikavendam. Vida means without leaving. Pidiyai means pidi is clinging. Pidiyai is an adverb formed from clinging. So vida pidiyai is an adverb, but describes clinging without leaving. In such a way, we have to cling to it. So, I mean, he used the word pidi twice. Vida pidiyai pidikavendam. Pidikavendam means it's necessary to hold on to that. Vida pidiyai is a very strong adverb to use in this context. It means the best we can say in English is tenaciously, but it doesn't quite express the spirit of that in Tamil. So that is what Bhagavan has asked us to do, to cling tenaciously to Svarupa smaraṇa. Let's not worry about the Vishaya vasanas. Let's not worry about all our sins or whatever worst type of person we may be. Doesn't matter. If we cling to that Svarupa smaraṇa, that is alone sufficient. As he says in the next paragraph, in the 11th paragraph, he says, Oruvan tan sarupate adeyam varayal. Until one attains Svarupa, one's own real nature, nirantara Svarupa smaranaye kai patruvanayan. If one clings firmly to self-attentiveness, to Svarupa smarana, literally means remembrance of one's real nature, or self-remembrance or self-attentiveness. If one holds on to that nirantara, without break, without interruption, if one holds on to that self-remembrance until one attains one's real nature, āṇadu. So that's all Bhagavan asks us to do, is to hold on to that Svarupa dhyana or Svarupa smaraṇa, and to hold fast to self-attentiveness. If we do that, our salvation is guaranteed. As he says, Nityam Urupadavan. We would definitely be saved. So this is all we need to do. Bhagavan has made it so simple for us.
So Svarupa smarana means
self-remembrance.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Svarupa doesn't mean form?
No, Svarupa, Rupa means form. Svarupa literally means one's own form, but it's a term but is used to refer to our real nature. That is, in many contexts, Bhagavan doesn't. Bhagavan often uses when referring to ourselves in Tamil, he often uses the word tān. Tān simply means oneself, or the equivalent Sanskrit word is Atma or Atman. It simply means oneself. It doesn't refer specifically either to ourself as ego or to ourself as we actually are. When Bhagavan wanted to make that distinction, I mean, in some contexts, he just leaves it for us to understand. When Tān refers to our real nature, when Tān refers to ourself as ego, it should be clear from the context. Same with the word Atman. Though it's often people misinterpret this, but when Bhagavan wants to make it a clear distinction, he refers to ourself as ego as ahande, or the thought called I. Ego. to distinguish our real nature, the term he uses is Svarupa or Atma-Svarupa. So in many English books, you'll see people have written, when people are recording what Bhagavan said, that you see it will be recorded as Bhagavan said, the self. Actually, there's no term in Tamil for the self with a capital S. Firstly, in Tamil and other Indian languages, there are no such thing as capital letters. Secondly, there are no definite articles. So there's no word in Tamil for the self. Bhagavan is either saying Tān, which in some contexts may mean our real nature. It can also mean our ego. It depends on the context. If he wants to make it clear that he's referring to our real nature, the term he uses is Svarupa. But the problem is in English, firstly, when it's translated the self, as soon as you say the self, it sounds like it's something other than yourself. That is, in English, we don't naturally refer to ourselves as the I or the self. We refer to ourselves as I, myself. That is a much more natural way of saying it. Bhagavan spoke in a very natural way. If he wanted to point specifically to our real nature, that is ourself as we actually are, the terms he used was either Svarupa or Svarupa smaraṇa or Atma-Svarupa. Atma-Svarupa means the real nature of oneself or the own form of oneself. That means what we actually are. So when he talks about Svarupa, he's referring to our real nature. So when he says Svarupa Dhyāna, he means meditation on our real nature. What is our real nature? I am. Not I am this or that, just I am. Svarupa smaraṇa, again, it means just remembering I am, just holding on to that I am. That is Svarupa smaraṇa, that is Svarupa Dhyāna. That is Atma-vichara. That Bhagavan uses many terms, but they're all referring to the same thing. In Upadēśa Undiyār, in verse 8, he uses the term ananya-bhava, meditation on what is not other. Other than what? Other than oneself. So what is not other than oneself? Only oneself is not other than oneself. So it's another way of saying the same thing, Atma-vichara or Svarupa smaraṇa. There are different ways of expressing it, but they're all pointing to that one thing.